what's similar, the similarity that those three people share in common: Samson, Achilles, Superman. Any thoughts? Samson, Achilles, and Superman. Yes. Yes, the power. They have a great, huge power. Superman from Krypton, before the Krypton was destroyed, his father sent him to Earth. But he has a weakness. The kryptonite. Right? He can't stand the kryptonite. What about Achilles? He was a mighty warrior. He fought against the Trojan Wars, yes. And then the Trojan, the warrior, King Hector, he kills him with the arrow at the Trojan. But he has a weakness. Where is his weakness? Heels, yes. Achilles' heels came from that. What about Samson? Samson was a mighty warrior, but he has a weakness. The secret of his power relies on here. Yes, his hair.
Yeah, but his weakness is Delilah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yes, he had two weaknesses. Oftentimes, right, we overlooked the woman Samson struggled with. But the secret of his power came from here. Today, the book of Philippians, Apostle Paul is writing this letter to Philippians, having a struggle within the church itself. But Apostle Paul, when he was writing this letter, he was in prison. The prison, the dungeon, not like prison that we know of today, but prison back in the old days, a dungeon, cold, dark, not a lot of food, famine. In his time, he was writing this letter, 4 chapters. And in this letter, he's sharing the power of Christian living and the secret of power. The secret of this power. In the beginning till the end of the chapter 4, Apostle Paul clearly shared with us that the power of Christian living is joy. If you have a Bible, please turn to Philippians chapter 4, verse 1 through 3. I'm going to lead you through verse 1 through 3. What we read today is 4 through 7. Here. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, my beloved. I urge Euodia and I urge Cynthia to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you also, my loyal companion, help this woman, for they have struggled beside me in the work of the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. As you can see, the Philippians church, there's a woman leading the church. Women leaders were encouraged, Apostle Paul, not only in the Philippians, but other letters that you can find in the Apostle Paul. The women were the major part of the leadership of the church. And that's not why I'm here to tell you this story. But this power of joy, the power of Christian living, this joy that the Apostle Paul is talking to, wasn't a place that the Philippian church wasn't experiencing the joy. Because the Philippian church themselves were struggling with the hardship themselves. One particular hardship that they were struggling was this new Christian, Gentile Christians, and this Jewish Christians that are fighting. That there was a division among the church. Gentile Christians who newly came to believe, and the Jewish Christians who insist on keeping the law, 10 commandments, especially keeping the circumcision. There's a Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians fighting over how to keep the church, how to go about doing the church business, so to say. And they're struggling. In this moment, Apostle Paul wasn't in his house writing this letter. He was in prison writing this letter, where the place where you think of joy, this place in prison, sorrow, anxiety, Paul is writing this letter in place of anxiety to the place where the struggle is eminent, prominent. This Philippian church, the people were anxious. People are nervous because they see this division among themselves. They see the struggles and hardship that are so close to them. They're almost touching their skin. They're so anxious. They're so anxious. And can you imagine here, right here in verse 4 to 7, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I heard this many, many, many times, especially when I was in college. I heard this, I memorized it, and I tell my friends to tell me if I'm struggling with my grade, if I'm struggling with my class. After college, I told my brothers and sisters in church to tell me this, especially when I'm facing struggles and anxieties. Oftentimes, this is taken out of the context and used oftentimes, many times, for us to realize, okay, we need to rejoice. Rejoice, yes, okay. And then we'll make thanksgiving and prayer, supplication to God, and then the peace of God will come and transcend our understanding. Okay, I get that. But do you really get that? What do you see here is in this place of anxiety, Paul is writing this letter. But at the end of verse 7, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Something is very different about verse 4 to 7. Something changed. It starts by saying, rejoice always. It's almost commanding them to rejoice, rejoice in this place of anxiety. But at the end of verse 7, Paul is saying, the peace of God will transcend all your understanding. The peace I give you. Really? In this time of anxiety, and in this time of struggle, hardship, you're giving me peace? How? You're not even in a place where you're peaceful. I know you're in prison, but how can you say this to me? How can you write this letter to me? Maybe some of the Philippians were upset, or maybe some of the Philippians were confused. Really? How can this be? How can this be? And today we find the secret of his power, the power of Christian living, the joy. And that joy has a secret. Like the Samson has a secret of his power, the hair. The secret was here in verse 6. Do not worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Apostle Paul's secret was prayer. What you see in verse 4 and what you see in verse 7 is totally different. Verse 4, anxiety, hardship. 7, peace of God. In between the two, what connects, what transformed the anxiety, the hardship to the peace was prayer. Do not worry about anything, but in everything, with thanksgiving, supplication, make yourself known to God through prayer. Pray. I remember the story as I'm reading the book called Methodism. Just United Methodists, reading about the Methodism, quite fair. Reading about the history of Methodism, John Wesley, I shared with you briefly last Sunday, had this the baby colony in Georgia. Recently, they built the colony in Georgia, and they started a new ministry there. And John Wesley, with the fire in his heart, went out to share the gospel with the Native Americans. but it was a total disaster, total failure. He wasn't being able to talking to them, and he wasn't being able to settle down in Georgia at all. Maybe perhaps it was the weather, or maybe it was the culture that he was facing. He couldn't get over with the atmosphere that he was in. It was total disaster. His fire for God was totally quenched. And he was so downcast, so depressed on his way back to England, on the ship ride back to England. Huge storm, thundering, strong wind. Just like last Sunday, it was strong. And I had to mention about how this strong wind might have